All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're excited to present to you a great webinar today. The topic for today is, of course, building leaders from within, upskilling and empowering your team. My name is Drew Tad. I'm the marketing director here at DecisionWise. Myself and the rest of the marketing team will be behind the scenes today to help facilitate questions and moderate the chat. Just while people are filtering in, I just have a couple of announcements and notes. This webinar does qualify for SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. If you're attending live, we will email you these credits right after the show. Just to introduce our hosts. So our first host is Matthew Wride. Matt is the president at DecisionWise. As the president of DecisionWise, Matt leads a team of experts in assisting organizations of all sizes to cultivate robust employee experiences through innovative software, people analytics, data, and professional insights. With over 8 years of experience in this leadership role and more than 15 years in the domains of corporate law, taxation, and private equity, Matthew brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. In addition to his executive role, he's an accomplished author, speaker, and board member dedicated to disseminating his knowledge and insights to a broad range of audiences and stakeholders. Dave Fetchman is a speaker consultant Dave Fetchman is the CEO at Velocity Advisory Group. He's a speaker, consultant, and certified executive coach who believes in high-performing organizations high-performing organizations successfully execute strategy, develop leaders, and intentionalize their cultures. This belief has inspired his 20-year career helping organizations and leaders reach their fullest potential. With that, I'll hand the time over to Matt and Dave to begin the presentation.
Great, we're glad to be here, and it's a real privilege for us at DecisionWise to be partnering with Velocity. I've had the chance to be with Dave now several times, and I can tell you he's a world-class executive coach, and we're honored that they would be willing to participate. Today, we're trying to talk about we are going to talk about a topic that's it's on the minds of HR leaders, talent professionals throughout all industries, really, and that is how can we find talent internally as opposed to always thinking externally. As demographics change and as we have more of the workforce entering into retirement, there's going to be less external talent, and so we're going to need to look internally for sources of skills and creativity and those types of things to move the organizations forward. And so that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to do that in the context of the power of 360-degree feedback and coaching. That's going to be how we talk about it, but our case is using that tool specifically to identify those folks that are ready for advancement. And so we'll cover again how to identify the high potential leaders in your organization. How do we get them the skills and competencies they need to be successful? And we'll also cover just some basic strategies for learning, because the core of all of this is learning, applied learning, getting that learning to mean something. But at the end of the day, when we take somebody and we identify them for a new position, we need to teach them how to do their job. And so that's what we're going to cover today. Any thoughts, Dave, before I move on?
No, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the introduction from Drew this morning. I think this topic is really critical, and in our executive coaching, I would say that succession planning, what do we do with these generational differences that we have, and how do we keep people excited and motivated? If it's not the number one theme, Matt, it's got to be one of the top 2 or 3 that we see regularly.
Sure. Yeah. So you're looking at the top 5 reasons, according to a recent SHRM study, for why it's difficult to retain people. And notice that I have not highlighted numbers 1 and 2. And that's because those are always going to show up on every survey, in every focus group, on every type of feedback we receive. And in some ways, those are difficult for organizations to manage. We all want to pay top dollar. but it's hard for us to manage that. And so same thing with personal reasons. People leave or decide to exit organizations for a variety of reasons. And sometimes we can't help the fact that maybe their spouse is ill or needs some extra care. And so those things we can't really deal with. But when we get to numbers 3 and 4, which I bolded there, those are the things we can control. And that's what we want to focus on today. Number 3 being poor people managers and leaders. And number 4 being limited advancement opportunities. And that's what we're here to talk about. How do we improve our leaders? How do we make them more effective? And how do we grow them into the positions that we need for the future? This is what we can control. I wish we could pay more. I wish we could help people with their personal needs, but really it's 3 and 4 that we should be focusing on. Dave, you want to cover this, investing in your people?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, you look at these 3 statistics, and I find them really fascinating. We sourced them from a couple of different areas, but I'm going to go through each one of these because I find there's nuance in some of these I want to really highlight and point out to the group. On the first one, the companies that offer high quality leadership, and I really want to go back to the words high quality leadership development programs, are 3.5 times more likely to outperform their competitors. So why do you think that's written the way that it is? A lot of organizations invest time and money into leadership development programs. A lot of organizations actually don't do that. We all know that post-COVID, there's a lot of organizations that have had to shift their resources to other areas. In many instances, they had a lot of explosive growth, and oftentimes talent development is something that actually begins to be deprioritized when there's high growth, or in the other times of contraction, you also see organizations de-emphasize leadership development. But high quality leadership development, we're going to talk a little bit about that today in this webinar. That's something that organizations that do this absolutely see an amazing ROI on that. And we'll spend some time later on that one. The middle one, I looked at that number originally, Matt, and I thought 15%, that seems like a kind of an insignificant statistic. I was a little underwhelmed by that. But then when I really peeled back and thought through, employees who feel their companies offer opportunities of growth are 15% more engaged. I really thought through, if every organization had 15% more engagement from their workforce, what could that mean? And you think through, we've seen a lot of reductions in force over the last 18 months or so. We've seen a lot of organizations really struggle with what do we do? How do we integrate artificial intelligence and machine learning? And you're starting to see workforces become less and less engaged in certain industries, for sure, in different pockets. Imagine that you were able to get a 15% uptick in each person on your team's willingness and discretionary effort. That could be pretty compelling. So I shifted on that, Matt, from when I originally saw the statistic from going, nah, to, oh, wow, that could be pretty significant. And then the last one is that 23% are more likely to stay with the company. And we think through the talent wars that we've seen and the attrition. I know unemployment has reached back down to kind of normalized rates or low rates right now. But 23% retention based on doing some things that you should do anyways is pretty phenomenal. We all know that longevity on the job creates more productivity. There's all sorts of statistics on that. So these are 3 extremely compelling reasons why you should invest in your people. I think the fourth one is your people expect it. And that's something that nowadays your workforce is expecting you to provide them those meaningful opportunities. And that's probably the most interesting and compelling reason to do this. So Matt, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I agree. First of all, that 15% number is a huge number. If we could just get 1% improvement across the board, that would be just leaps and bounds progress. But to get 15% in engagement would be huge. The other thing you mentioned is it's an expectation. Employees keep score, and they learn how much you value them by what you invest in them. And pay is important. But once you cross a certain threshold, you've taken pay off the table. It's these other activities that demonstrate your commitment, and it's how they feel valued. In some ways, it's more important than handwritten cards or breaks in the snack or snacks in the break room. This is where they feel like I'm getting better. And no one comes to work and just says, hey, I just want to be average. Everybody comes and says, I want to get better and I want to be above average. And when we invest in them, we signal to them that they matter to us.
You know, Matt, I think the other thing that they're looking at is you haven't invested in my leader in quite some time, and it's starting to show. My leader's soft skills aren't where they need to be. My leader isn't developing me. My leader doesn't know how to handle conflict or problems as they arise. They're not holding my peers accountable. There's all sorts of things that they're also paying attention to, not just about themselves, but the people that are leading them.
For sure. And you mentioned the word soft skills. We used to identify hard and soft skills, but there's no such thing anymore. It's expected that you be a good communicator, that you have empathy. I don't know if we should keep using the term soft and hard anymore.
Yeah.
Because they're all hard. They're all vital. That's the new world we live in. Gen Z and the millennials bring a new set of expectations to the workforce, and you have to be well-rounded. You just can't be a good organizer. You need to be a good communicator, and you need to be an empathetic listener, and so on.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later about the generational divide and some things that your organization can do to bridge that are no cost or low cost solutions. So
For sure.
All right, well, let me move on. So we talk about these high potential employees, and we act sometimes as if they're elusive or hard to identify. And I wish that they wore a sign on their forehead that would say, hey, I'm one of those. But last I checked, most high potentials don't do that. So what are some things you should look for? And I'll give you a little extra one, at least in my opinion, that is really the easiest tell, if you will. But there's a few things on here. One, these aren't just your highest performers. A lot of times your high potentials haven't gathered the experience yet that they need to be high performers. Doesn't mean that their potential isn't there. It just means that they haven't been able to couple their experience that they brought into that role with the experience that they've gained on the job just yet. So high potentials aren't always the highest performers yet, but they do have the capacity for growth. Number two, how do they interact with their colleagues and their teammates? That's a really important tell as well. These high potentials generally are well regarded by their colleagues, their teammates, other people cross-functionally. They're looking for ways to improve things around them, the processes, the systems, the why behind the job. They're the ones that are saying, wait a second, I get that that's always the way it's been done around here, but maybe we should make some improvements. And they're bringing fresh ideas to the table. My favorite one on here, and I'll just get to what that little extra credit one that I was referencing, they show initiative. And what's the thing that I look for, and a lot of the leaders that we coach and work with look for? That's that they give discretionary effort. They don't do the bare bones minimum that would say that they did a nice job. High potentials go above and beyond. And again, when you're looking at generational differences, that is something that we are seeing from one generation to the next, the definition even of discretionary effort. I worked 41 hours this week. You should be really happy with my contribution. That's some of the things that we're beginning to see. So what is it that they're doing that maybe more than what was initially asked, that's adding real value to your organization or to your clients? Those are things to keep an eye out for. And then lastly, these are the folks that are saying, I want you to invest in me. I'm looking for ways to invest in myself. So I'm going to take it upon my own shoulders to take charge of my development and move the ball forward. So these are some of the things that you can, instead of that sign on their forehead, Matt, these are some of the things that you can look for to identify this population.
For sure. And one comment, you mentioned the extra credit one, which is show initiative. We have to get better as organizations in not just defining discretionary effort only in terms of hours, but in terms of value, creativity, because that's what the next generation may be bringing. So we need to be aware of that, and that's where guided learning, coaching, and some of the tools we're going to talk about really come into play. Another point too is that we have to identify earlier than we think. These folks don't just pop up and suddenly bloom like a flower and it's easy to go identify them. You have to start sooner and make sure that they have a breadth of experiences necessary to have the soil and the nutrients they need in order to blossom into that leader that you want. And so the process starts sooner than we might expect. So we're going to dive into essentially what we offer at DecisionWise, which is using 360-degree feedback to guide leadership development and to improve the quality of executive coaching and consulting, which is what Dave's firm does. And I love this quote: "More is missed by not looking than not knowing," meaning it's really about being curious. It's more important to be curious and to constantly look for answers than it is to sort of just accept that you don't know. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with 360-degree feedback. So what is it? It's an evaluation method where we seek feedback about an executive from all the people that surround that executive or that leader. So the supervisor, the direct reports, sometimes we look externally to customers or key contacts that they may manage, and we ask for feedback about them. And the important thing to know about 360-degree feedback is that it's structured on behaviors. We ask those that are offering this information, giving their perspective. We ask them to do so in by talking about the behaviors that they observe in that particular person, in the participant, in the leader that's being evaluated. And why is that important? Well, we don't know what goes on inside the head of someone else. I'm really good at telling you what I think. I can tell you in a survey, a focus group, something like that. I can tell you how I feel. But I can't tell you, right now I have no way of truly telling you what Dave feels on this, okay? But I can tell you if I see Dave doing things. I can see if Dave takes the time to mentor and support others. I can see if Dave uses written agendas in a meeting to make sure that they're more effective. We can ask people about the behaviors that we observe, and that's the best way we can that's the best way we know of gathering feedback from those external to the leader. Okay, what does it get for us? Enhanced self-awareness, the ability to communicate better, and the chance to identify development needs. And the most important of those is, and my favorite, is enhanced self-awareness. One of my all-time favorite articles in Harvard's Business Review was that self-awareness may be the most important skill one could have. In fact, I think the title of this article was "Why Self-Awareness May Be More Important Than an MBA." Yeah. Right? The fact is, if you're self-aware, you can learn and you can grow. And especially when you pair self-awareness with mentoring from a coach, that's supercharging it. That's really taking it to the next level. But 360-degree feedback, again, from a survey science perspective, and what we do is really the best way to understand what's happening with a leader. We just get the best feedback from the most reliable sources.
Yeah, Matt, before you move on, I'd like to just say two things. One, I think self-awareness is also probably the number one determinant of a healthy relationship with other colleagues or even people in your personal life. Right. Imagine that everybody in the world was just a little bit more self-aware than they are today, which a 360, maybe the whole world should take one, Matt. I don't know. But the level of self-awareness really allows your half of that relationship equation to be at its best. So that's one thing. The other thing that we have found, we generally, when we're coaching a leader, not just executives, but any leader, we share with them a whole list of benefits that they get from that coaching engagement. And number one thing that almost everybody says that they want is to help them identify blind spots and areas of vulnerability. And if you think about that, it's a blind spot by the nature of the world. They don't know what their blind spots are without some sort of assistance. And generally, if I don't use a written agenda, using your example, Matt, generally some people are a little nervous to share that feedback directly outside of a form of a 360 or some other way to invite them to share that feedback. So this is a great way to really help anybody that you know gain awareness about themselves in a productive and safe way that allows that leader to get better, improve their self-awareness, and incrementally look for ways to improve. So I'm 100% in agreement with you, Matt, that this is a great solution.
What's interesting, Dave, and you'll know this from all your executives that you coach, the higher you move up in the organization, all the other natural forms of feedback, they start getting less and less because no one wants to offend the boss.
Right.
Right? And so when you get the 360 is important and really powerful at that executive level because it's a formal process. We group answers together, so we try to maintain some level of confidentiality. And if the leader gets behind it and says, no, I really want you to take this opportunity, I really want to hear your feedback, it can be really powerful, and it can break down the tendency that we have to not pass bad news on up the chain of command. But and that's why we sometimes call this a disruptor, because we kind of insert this in there to say, hey, look, we do need to make sure that even the very best leaders get this type of feedback so they can get the blind spots, so they can uncover the blind spots that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why does it make sense? So this is five key points I want to touch on really the value proposition or the case why you should be incorporating 360-degree feedback paired with coaching into your organization. Number one, it's competency-based. Good feedback has a structure, it has a framework or a lattice upon which we can put the feedback and use it and guide leaders. And the best way to do that is using competencies, which are skills that we've identified are key to success. If your organization doesn't have a competency strategy, hasn't taken the time to do some competency design at all levels, it's something you should really look into, because it's a way of signaling very clearly what matters to the organization at various levels of leadership. And it changes. You might have very tactical elements at lower levels, frontline managers, for example, and that may shift to strategic and people-focused elements the higher you move up inside an organization. But having a framework of competencies, and people then know, even from the act of giving the feedback, they suddenly realize, oh, this is what matters to my organization. They care about creativity, and they're looking to see me demonstrate these types of behaviors. So even as I'm giving feedback to someone else, I'm also getting a sense indirectly of what matters to the organization. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer that it needs to be competency-based, and that's an advantage of 360-degree feedback rather than just saying, tell us about this leader, which is subject to a lot of biases and particularly recency bias. This one at least says, hey, have you observed this leader doing X? Okay, number two, ultimately, this is, for me, I think that 360-degree feedback is an employee experience question, meaning it answers what type of experience is a particular leader creating for others. It's that micro experience. And is it the right experience? That's the power of 360-degree feedback. And so when we understand that we have some blind spots that are detracting from the experience we want to create, or maybe that we do some things pretty well that we didn't realize and we want to invest more in those activities, it helps us understand that experience at the micro level. And that's huge. And it's the best tool that I'm aware of as someone who's in the business of employee experience management design. It's the best tool I know of understanding the experience at that key team level or at that leader level. Next.
Before you move on to number three, Matt, I think number two is really interesting because now organizations have shifted either from fully co-located like they were pre-COVID. Everybody went fully remote for a long time. Now organizations are whatever they are. They're hybrid workplaces or back in the office or fully remote still. But these experiences can really differ based on where the employee's working and how they're interacting with their leader and how they're interacting with their colleagues. We're seeing a lot of different outcomes for the employees nowadays on Mondays and Fridays when they're working from home versus Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday when they're in the workplace. So this one's really, really interesting. And leaders, I don't know, think enough about the experience that they're creating for their employees or even the people around them. So I love that you added number 2 to the list.
Yeah, Dave, and you make such a salient point, which is we need to measure our experience more than we used to. If the old dynamic was I came to the office 5 days a week and I was in person and people sat next to me or near me, the need to get feedback was probably on a cadence of, say, every 1 to 2 years or something. But if I'm remote and people are onboarding and leaving my team a lot, and I've got a team in India that's different from a culture and a time zone perspective, then I need to be thinking about their experiencing and likely measuring that more frequently than I have had to do in the past, simply because my operating environment is different. Yeah,
great point.
So number 3, it provides context for learning and development questions. I love 360-degree feedback because it creates meaningful conversations. If a coach has access to the report, they're able to sit down with that executive and really say, hey, why is this happening? You've got this feedback from a group of team members. What's going on here? Why are you being perceived this way? And you can have some really rich conversations, and you'll begin to identify either strengths that you want to continue to invest in, or you may find 1 or 2 areas that you could close the gap on. And so my business partner here, Tracy Mielit, says 360-degree feedback helps us discuss the undiscussables. It gives us we kind of know going into it that we're going to have maybe a frank conversation. And if there's a coach there to really hold us accountable, we're going to have to face some feedback that we may necessarily not want or may not necessarily get very often. And that is the key to finding where our development opportunities lie. Yeah. Mentioned already that it's a disruptor. And I was just sort of talking about that look, it makes us stop and evaluate. Sometimes when we're doing a 360-degree feedback session and we're just doing a debrief, for example, I'll ask someone, I'll say, when was the last time you spent 90 minutes just thinking about your career and how you show up in the workplace? And they'll often pause and say, man, that's not very often. And they really take a pause and they're like, man, I'm really glad that sometimes I am forced to do this. So it's a disruptor in that it sometimes forces leaders to pause and reflect and not just keep assuming that everything's okay. And then this one has been kind of layered throughout the 4 previous points. It's a framework. As I said, it helps us discuss the undiscussables. So let's see. We've got a few questions that I just saw hit that maybe we can address real quick.
All right.
One from Dawn. It says, it seems since COVID, the employment pool has changed completely. There is a mentality that I, as an employer, owe more and should expect less. How do we get out of that rut? What do you think?
Oh, that's great. Dawn, that's a great question. I think a lot of the relationship between the employee and the employer is aligned on expectations. And I think a lot of it starts with conversations, removing assumptions, creating environments where you can have those sorts of things where you're open and receptive to that feedback. So I think, Dawn, it's a really, really good question. And I think that a lot of it is a cultural phenomenon. And we're going to talk actually a little bit about culture here in a few minutes, but great question. I would say it starts with dialogue, open listening, and of course it's the organization's responsibility to make that a safe and inviting opportunity.
I'll take the next one, Dave. It's a question from Alan about sometimes it feels that employees only express negativity on 360-degree feedback, and how can we change that? A lot of that is in design. We can get better at designing instruments that ask us to make sure we frame positive feedback. And so that's on me and my team to help organizations design the very best instruments, assessments that we can. But also, I really am a believer in having the leader sort of say, hey, you're going to go through a process, and remind people that we need to give both feedback that's constructive, redirecting, but also reinforcing. Because leaders need to know where they're succeeding just as much as they need to know where they might need some improvement. Because a strengths-based approach is just as, it may be more valuable than just trying to find all the gaps and fix them. So, and then the last one from Bob is he's seen lots of 360 companies who do this, but without the coaching, and so it hasn't been as well received. They've left the company resentful and not understood. He says, can the two of you please comment on how best to ensure that 360 feedback elevates the individual and the organization through coaching? Well, Dave, you're a coaching expert. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Bob on that question, and I would share with you one of the things that coaching brings is objectivity and perspective to that. Imagine that you're getting feedback for the first time that was a blind spot, like we've talked about, and it was feedback that you weren't ready to hear. So having a coach walk you through that makes it productive as opposed to them resonating or marinating in the negative. We usually start off a coaching conversation, and all of you on this call should think about this if your organization does 360s, walking that recipient through the SARA model. I'll just go through it really quickly. It's an acronym. It means that they're going to be surprised, then they're going to be angered or annoyed, then they're going to rationalize the feedback, and then hopefully, not always, but hopefully move towards acceptance. And then if a SARA with an H would be seeking help, right? Looking for help. So what I would tell you is oftentimes without the coaching element to it, they get stuck in that rationalization. Oh, that employee didn't have a good mid-year review. Oh, that person's on a PIF, or that group of people just got shifted into whatever. And they rationalize the feedback as opposed to reflecting on it, accepting it at some sort of level of truth, and then creating an action plan to work from. So I think the coaching is an important element. Even if it's not through a professional firm like Velocity, your organization should be guiding the people through their results, whether they look for external coaching or not, because without that, sometimes the feedback can be jarring for the recipient.
And I would just add that if you, because of budget constraints, you're not able to use an outside professional firm like Velocity, you can still use Velocity to help train internal coaches. It's still worth investing in teaching people how to go through the process of coaching others. And so that's the next best thing. I think the best thing is when you can bring outsiders who can be objective and safe. But if you can't, at least get them trained from a firm like Velocity to know how to give this feedback and how to help people move past that rationalization stage.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to developing these employees, and we've thrown the words high potential in there, but really, I think we could even remove that descriptor and just say, how should you be developing employees in 2024? Because adult learning is changing. It's changed a lot with technology and access to information. If you look at what was hot several years ago in trends in human resources and learning and development to what's hot today, it's continuing to evolve the way that people consume information and learn and grow. So here are a few different things that are really relevant right now. Number one is your people are thinking about what's next in their career progression, whether you're talking about it or not. So tying together development plans for each of your employees, either as a population, a job family, or those high potentials with their succession plan, whether they're in line for someone's succession or it's just for their own professional growth, it's really critical today. So that's one idea. Number two, a lot of organizations have mentoring programs. I would argue a lot of really high potential or high performing organizations, they really formalize their mentoring. We have a CPA firm, James Moore and Associates down in Florida. There's a lot of CPA firms like CLA and others that we know do a great job at formalizing mentoring. That seems to be an industry. Law firms seem to do a great job at this too. But a lot of other industries aren't as committed to that formalized mentoring. And if you think back hundreds of years or thousands of years, apprenticeships and more ways to get feedback and have that relationship have existed. And we're starting to see a resurgence back to that model. Anyone curious what 70-20-10 means? I'll explain it to you. It's the way that adults learn, and it really, when you think about applied learning or experiential learning, this is the formula that you want to subscribe to. So what the formula is 70% of the way that adults learn is through experience. That means that they learn some sort of competency, they learn how to delegate, they learn how to hold others accountable or themselves accountable, time management, conflict resolution, change management. Whatever that skill is, they need to be able to practice it for it to stick. So that's the 70%. 20% is more around informal learning or exposure. So me watching Matt do it, watching what works for him and adopting those. You think through like culinary schools, there's a lot of exposure to more senior people that are learning or practicing those skills. And only 10% of the way that people learn is actually like classroom or formal learning, similar to what we're going through today. So this model, you should adopt a longer learning path for your employees, and it should be rooted in a blend of experience, peer-to-peer feedback or exposure, and that structured learning. And that's an evolution that we're starting to see a lot of organizations gravitate towards.
Yeah,
I'll make these. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Point out the best, and one of the great ways of measuring experiential learning is to ask people, hey, how's it going for this person, right? That's what we're asking about. What is your experience like with that person? So then we can really tailor the learning in that 70% bucket where we know it's most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I love, these high potentials, I'm going back specifically to that population, they don't want to be in the herd or the pack with everyone else. They want you to give them stretch assignments. They want you to give them meaningful work. They want to work with people outside of their department to learn and gain broader, more rounded experience. So give it to them. Create projects that are cross-functional where you have 2 or 3 people on a task force, assignments that will challenge them, that they have to think harder and be more resourceful to pull that assignment off. Your high potentials want that. They're used to the challenge, and they need that from their employers as well. The last 2 around job rotations. Some industries, like our friends in healthcare, we see that a lot, where they'll not just rotate from role to role, but they'll rotate from hospital to hospital. My background is in banking. I did that early on in my career. I sat behind the teller line. I sat in the retail branch, the commercial branch, investment side. But job rotation is a great way for them to learn different skills. And one of the reasons why I really like that is you do not want a diamond in the rough or a hidden commodity in your organization. If there's a talent in your organization that only their leader knows is good, and you have an opening in another department, but no one knows that Fred or Sally is really good at what potentially a good fit, they're going to leave your organization to go work somewhere else versus you being able to promote from within and cross-functionally. So job rotations is a great strategy. And then giving regular performance feedback, not just formal performance feedback with an annual review or a mid-year review, but if I did something great or if I did something less than great, let me know timely and let me know what I can do about that now so I can continue to learn and grow in a non-punitive way. Because if you only wait to share with me the things that I need to do to improve annually, you're missing the moment, and I'm not going to have a chance to respond accordingly. Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just on that regular feedback, we probably underestimate the amount of feedback we ought to give by a factor of 3. We just don't ever communicate enough. And so you have to rely on the formal processes to make sure that it happens and they serve as a backstop. But that's the minimum threshold. We should be going far above that in our one-on-ones. And also, we need to make sure that we give as much reinforcing or positive feedback as we give, probably double or triple the amount of positive reinforcing feedback as we give of redirecting feedback or feedback designed to sort of correct something. I want to share with you an experience that's really applicable to what Dave has up here. We were asked to use some 360s to help evaluate a leadership team to think about who would take over as the CEO for a fairly large client. And as we went through the process, there were two leaders that stood out that had a lot of capability, and they had fabulous scores from the teams they led. These were really talented leaders. The challenge is, and it goes to this job rotation and stretch assignments, they were subject matter experts in sort of niche areas, and they had gotten to the point in their career that they didn't have enough broad-based experience to really make them eligible for that CEO position.
Yeah.
And if they had been given stretch assignments maybe 5 years earlier or something, they would have enough breadth of experience in order to be considered, because they just had it all, but they were sort of overlooked because they were niche. And so remember that these stretch assignments and job rotation have a benefit to the organization because they help us uncover some diamonds in the rough that may be pigeonholed because of a job title or a particular function.
I love that example, Matt. And I'll tell you, I know the words are on this slide, but succession planning seems to be something that's so top of mind for everybody because they're having to go out externally because of what you just said is they haven't done a good job of developing their talent. And the example you used were not two entry-level new roles in an organization. These are people that were already part of the C-suite.
Yep.
They're already part of the upper leadership in that organization. So I thought that was a great example. But this is not stuff. This slide to me is really invaluable for you to not always have to spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time in developing external candidates to fill roles where you've got a farm system in your own organization to develop these people into bigger roles.
And one last thing that I appreciate you bringing up and mentioning for our audience is that this needs to be something deliberate and have a process associated with it. It's not just one of those things I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah.
So this star employee is just going to shine, and we'll know who to go and promote next. It rarely works that way.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably a good segue to the culture, right?
Right. Yep. Don't let your leading lead to knowledge. Let your learning lead to action. And great leaders are not born and they're not discovered, they're built. Mm-hmm. And I think you know that as well as anyone. And that's what we're saying here is let's do what we do should have the end result of moving the organization forward. We just don't learn to learn. Otherwise, we should just, give everybody a Coursera free subscription and let them have at it. We need to guide their learning and make sure that it moves their career forward, but also it moves the organization forward and is developing a bench of leaders that are really all ready to go and be promoted to the next level. Dave, you have lots of thoughts on culture, so I'll let you kind of speak to that because that's what you do a lot of this.
Yeah, and Matt, I appreciate that. Going way back to one of the earlier slides with the 3 statistics, we talked about high quality learning. I'm sure Coursera is just phenomenal, but you really want to provide high quality learning, that 70-20-10 model, and other things that are skills based or technically based that your people are gaining real knowledge from in order for this to be true. And that goes back to the culture that you're setting for a learning environment. So this is the last slide. If you all have questions for me or for Matt, please begin putting them into the chat box because we're going to share these last 3 strategies, if you will, and then open it up for more Q&A. So we talked about how do you identify a high potential. We talked about how do you develop a high potential or just frankly anybody. Now we're going to step back and talk about, well, creating a culture in your organization for guided learning or applied learning. That's a whole different ball of wax, because that makes everything more intentional. This is not, it takes the randomness out of it, or the perception of favoritism. I really like Matt. I love his glasses. I'm going to invest in his development because he and I get along well. We go to lunch a couple times a week. If you have a culture for guided learning or applied learning, it allows everybody to feel like they have the ability to invest in themselves and that you're going to invest in their growth. So what does that look like? Number one, demonstrate a commitment from the leadership. They will see right through it if you're faking it. If it's not authentic and the leaders aren't involved and the leaders aren't endorsing or behind a culture of learning, that's going to be pretty flimsy, and it's going to show. Learning as a core value. I love this one. Velocity, one of our essential behaviors, which is our version of core values, is embrace curiosity. So we literally regularly recognize people that take it upon themselves to grow, or we find ways to help them grow. So that's something that you should really consider for your organization, is how do you formalize that as a value? It doesn't have to be one of your core values necessarily, if those are etched in stone, but it should be something that you hold true. And opportunities for employees to share. One of my favorite adages is the best way to learn is to teach. And a lot of times we send our employees to these conferences, we send employees to advanced learning, they're in MBA programs, whatever it is that they're doing to learn and grow. Yet we never talk about that. They gain all this wisdom, but they don't A, apply it, B, able to share it. So we really encourage our clients, hey, when that person goes to that conference, have them come back and present on your weekly huddle meeting. What did they learn at that conference? What were some of the top 5 headlines that they picked up on? Again, the best way to learn is to teach. Last 3 I'll do fairly quickly. Evolve and empower managers to become coaches. One of the things I see, especially in younger tenured employees, and I don't mean that by age, but where they haven't gained 2 decades of experience, is they confuse management and coaching and leadership, and they don't know really how to switch hats. A good management conversation is not the same as a coaching conversation. And we see a lot of leaders tell people how to do something, or what to do, what to do minus the how to do it, and helping them develop and helping their mandates be understood and cascaded down into something that those employees can do something about. So managers aren't natural coaches. Coaching is something that you have to invest in. And one of the things I believe strongly in is teach everyone who has a direct report how to coach and develop those people. They should know how to do that. Their employees need that, and your competitors are teaching their managers how to coach. You need to be on board with that as well. What I love about this next one, we've talked about mentoring. I won't belabor that. But what we haven't talked about is reverse mentoring. And I was going to share a quick story, Matt. Last week, we got all of our executive coaches together, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and how to use ChatGPT with our clients in a productive way. It was obvious during that call that we're all preaching to the choir. We had no millennials, we had no Gen Zers in that call that could put a blindfold on and really help us understand why this is important and how to do it more effectively. We were clumsy, and we're talking through a topic that's still new and emerging for Velocity, being a little vulnerable. But reverse mentoring is something that's really powerful. The generational divides it's a huge gap, and there's a lot of them between each generation. I'd even argue the generational divide between millennials and Gen Z is broader than people realize. They're very different generations. Reverse mentoring allows people to better understand one another, and our younger generation to feel empowered to help educate and help our more senior leaders grow. And then we talked about this last one earlier as well, is make sure that your learning goals and your competencies that you need of your leaders and your high potentials is worked into their formal performance reviews. That's something that we oftentimes see a major disconnect. the performance review is oftentimes based on like numeric metrics and things of that nature, but not necessarily what those learning goals need to be. Bridging that will make that more relevant and embraced by your people. So Matt, any final thoughts before we move to the Q&A?
Well, Dave, I loved your point about coming back and teaching after learning has taken place. I think it's Richard Feynman, the renowned physicist, that said, you don't really understand a subject until you can teach it to an 8th grader. And I think he's really right on that. And I love that. That's such a powerful little tip that is easy to implement, and it's no cost. So really like that one. The other thing I wanted just to mention is it's a quote attributed to John Wooden, the famous basketball coach for UCLA. He once said that coach is really another word for teacher. And in many ways, a good leader is another word for teacher. Teaching the values of the organization, teaching the strategy, teaching how to get better. We all can relate back to those amazing teachers that had an impact in our life. And I think if you want a kind of a shortcut way of evaluating whether you're a good leader, ask yourself if you're that type of teacher, right? That if someone would reflect back and say, I had Mrs. Robinson in 3rd grade, would they also similarly say, when I started my career out, I had Nancy. In fact, this was my first manager, Nancy Robinson. She was amazing. And I have the same kind of positive feelings that I have about my 3rd grade teacher, who also was Mrs. Robinson, as I did with Nancy, my first manager at Deloitte. But I think it's important to remember that learning and teaching are really important aspects of leadership. Leadership isn't about telling people what to do, but about encouraging them through the act of teaching.
Love it, Matt. All right, so I think we are at the Q&A. I see that Drew has collected some questions. I have no clue, Matt, how you've been putting those on the screen, which is pretty cool.
First one is, how can we ensure that our high potential employees' identification process is unbiased and inclusive? That comes by making sure your selection process is not based on people you like, but is based on a rubric or a set of criteria that can be tested as rather than just, hey, everybody submit their favorite suggestions of people we ought to watch and grow. It needs to have some evaluative criteria. Dave, what do you think?
I agree. I also think that anytime that you can measure success in a binary way, that it was observable, yes or no. So I like it based on things that are observable, as opposed to feelings or hunches or something that's less quantifiable.
You'd be surprised even if you just surveyed and said, who do you go to most for help in your organization? They create these network diagrams, Dave. And so by asking that question, you'll find people that you would never suspect are these nodes in this amazing network of where do I go to for help? You could start there. Where do I go to for help? And it won't necessarily line up with your org chart.
Yeah, that's a great.
Always fascinating when we run one of those studies and say, oh, you didn't know that this person buried in this office is actually a key hub of a network of help that people use.
Yeah, I love that.
What are some effective programs we can implement with limited budget and resources? Everything takes, business is a question of scarcity. How do I allocate scarce resources to the right initiatives? So there's always a need for resources, but I think I would start off and just reemphasize the one you taught, Dave, which is have people who learn come back and teach, take advantage of their learning, and then cascade that down.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things, Matt, that we talked about today, reverse mentoring, formal mentoring, lunch and learns, 360s are, in my opinion, are an economical way to gain feedback. There's all sorts of ways that you can do this. I would we do, recommend cultural advisory boards, standing up people that are not your executives that own some of these initiatives and drive it for their peers. And there's a few different ways to do that, but I love the question. And frankly, low cost and no cost improvements, that is what is really going to get your executives' attention. So I would start there and begin getting some of these incremental improvements. That way, when it comes to setting aside budget, they're already starting to see the needle move. So it was a great question.
I think there's one last one from Marcus. Do you have any recommended resources for the infrastructure needed for a formalized mentorship program? Dave, you want to read that, and then I could add some thoughts too.
Yeah, we do. We have we've helped organizations stand up a lot of formalized mentoring, Marcus, and there are ways to do that the right way. Generally speaking, you don't want the leader being the person responsible to mentor the mentee, if you will. That mentee needs to feel safe and that they can be vulnerable and share any concerns or areas that they can grow where there's nothing punitive around it. So the formality of it is making sure that you're matching people with the wisdom and experience and the right temperament to mentor and groom people that are younger in their careers, that there is no direct performance review connection between the two. But yeah, there's another great question.
Yeah, I think we're at time. We have other questions jumping in, and if you want to email them to Drew, we will respond by email to those and get back to you. But we are appreciative of the time that the audience has given us. We love talking about this stuff. And if you want to do a great 360 program, please partner with us. We'd love to help you design a great instrument and give you the software to run them. And Dave is there to give you the coaching and infrastructure you need to make sure you pair a 360 with coaching.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for your time today. And I also want to echo thanks for everybody hanging in there with us. And we've got all sorts of great resources. So reach out to Drew and we're happy to share. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.